Hi guys, this is the guided poetry reading for the poem Mother to Son. So you should have two things handy. They're in your Module 11 packet. You're going to flip through and find the page that looks like this. Remember last week when we did our poetry notes, the Module 11 packet, we flipped and you have your poetry notes. And then if you keep going, there's the agenda for this week. And then right after that, you'll see this paper. Please make sure that you fill in the heading information at the top, have your first and your last name, your period and your cohort, and then today's date. I have put the assignment here, Guided Poetry Reading for Mother to Son by Langston Hughes. So you have that handy. The other thing that you need is your book. And we are turning in our book to page 192. And we're looking on the left-hand side of the page before we have the poem. I do want to take a look at the information that is provided here. Both of these poems share a similar common themes. We see facing life's obstacles at the top. So follow along with me. The following poems focus on facing life's challenges. What kinds of problems do people experience? What kinds of barriers are difficult for them to overcome? With a group of classmates, share your ideas and consider what gives some people the determination to overcome obstacles. Now, obviously, if you're watching this video alone, that's not possible for you to do. If by chance I am home and not able to be in the classroom with you, but there is a substitute showing you this video, you can pause this and take a few moments to discuss some of your ideas. When you're ready, let's take a look at the build background. We just missed Black History Month now that it's March, but we can still read literature of African Americans, and that's what we see here, the African American experience, where the poetry of both Langston Hughes and Gwendolyn Brooks reflects the experience of growing up an African American in the early part of the 20th century, which would be the similar time period of the novel that we spent most of the beginning of the year reading. For Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, that would be the beginning of the 20th century. Although some of these poems were written even before that, that novel took place in the 1930s, and Hughes wrote quite a bit during the 1920s, which we see right here. It says Hughes was first recognized as an important literary figure during the 1920s. Many of his poems portrayed the lives of ordinary African Americans. So if you remember, in social studies, the 20s, you hear about the Roaring 20s and that. There was also this thing called the Harlem Renaissance. And there was a lot of focus on African Americans artists, whether it was music or artwork or poetry. And Hughes was part of that. So then we see much of Brooks's poetry also paints a vivid picture of the lives of African Americans. Her first collection, A Street in Bronzeville, describes the lives of the residents of a poor neighborhood in Chicago, the city in which Brooks has lived from an early age. So on the right-hand side, I do want to talk about speaker. We see the voice that speaks the poem's words is called the speaker. In the poem Mother to Son, the very first words, "Well, son, I'll tell you," give a clue as to who the speaker is. Sometimes the speaker is a person whom the poet has created. As you read the poems that follow, notice the personality and attitude of each speaker. So thinking of that, Mother to Son was written by Langston Hughes. Notice the pronoun use of Hughes, his poems. Do you think he could be a mother? Not likely. So obviously this is a character that he's created to be the speaker of his poem. It's not actually him. And when you go to write your own advice poem, you have the option to do that as well, create a speaker, or it could be somebody, be yourself. The making inferences, we won't read that. Well, actually, we will read it. That paper I just showed you, though, that's what we're going to be doing. So it tells us in order to understand the speaker of a poem, you need to make inferences. Logical guesses or conclusions based on clues in the poem. As you read each of the following poems, considering the following: what the title tells you about the speaker, what you learn about the speaker's experience, and what advice the speaker gives you. And that worksheet that you have in your packet is basically your reader's notebook that we're going to be going through. All right, let's take a look at the poem itself, and then we'll go to the guided poetry page. Mother to Son by Langston Hughes. Well, son, I'll tell you. Life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor. Bare. But all the time I spent it climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So, boy, don't you turn back. Don't you set down on the steps 'cause you finds it's kinder hard. Don't you fall now, for I still going, honey. I still climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair. So there's some questions here. If we're in person, we can stop to discuss them. I want you to think about it. What was your reaction to the speaker of the poem? So what do you think about this voice that we just heard? When reading the poem aloud, did you note the difference in rhythm between the short and long lines? Did you catch any of that as I read it? And what do you think the speaker means when she says that her life has not been a crystal stair? So think about that idea of a crystal stair. We're going to touch on that as we go through this guided poetry page. So we'll come back to that. Let's take a look over here. So first of all, let's make our inferences. You can simply handwrite in the column underneath inference, but the title is Mother to Son. What does that mean? What do we infer from that? We can figure out that it is a mother talking to her son, right? Now let's talk about that imagery there of life for me ain't been no crystal stair. So imagine, picture this crystal staircase. Do you have an image in your mind? I do. I picture this grand curving staircase like in a palace or in the movies that you might see. And you think of somebody who's probably rich, right? And has had an easy life. But for her, it ain't been no crystal stair. And she does go on to explain what her staircase is like. So when we look at the poem itself, her staircase, right after it, sorry, I slide up a little bit here for you. Her staircase has tacks in it, splinters, boards torn up, places with no carpet on the floor, bare. So what does she mean when she's saying that life for her ain't been no crystal stair? She's saying life has not been easy, right? But how about the I's been a climbing on? So even though all these terrible things are in her staircase, she keeps climbing, she keeps going. Go back to the poem, sorry, it's things to go back and forth. But all the time I's been a climbing on. We have in reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. What does that mean figuratively? If she's not really in the staircase with the lights out, what does it mean to go through life, sometimes going in the dark? Maybe she doesn't know what's going to happen next. Something like that. There's lots of possibilities. Unfortunately, when I'm the only one sharing ideas in the video, you get that idea. She doesn't know what is going to happen. All right, back to the poem. And she gives her advice here. So boy, don't turn back. Don't you set down on the steps because you finds it's kind of hard, right? Don't you fall now, for I still going, honey. I still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. And I think I still climbing, the second to last line is the next one that we see here. What does she mean? Oh no, I skipped it. Don't turn back is what she says. What's she telling him when she's saying don't turn back? Don't give up, right? Don't stop. All right, and she didn't give up, right? All right, so I'm going to talk about the next few questions, and then you're going to answer these independently on your own. We see identify, or we're looking at form and structure. So remember that form and structure is how the lines and words are arranged on the page. And this is a free verse poem. So free verse means it does not have to rhyme. It doesn't follow any particular rules, doesn't have to have particular stanzas, etc. It's up to the poet. So you need to identify 2 or 3 lines in the poem and explain how their length emphasizes a point and gives added meaning to the words. This answer should be an ACE answer. So you need to include a topic sentence, you need 2 text details, so 2 lines from the poem, and explain those lines. So length, we're looking at how long or how short they are. So I'm going to point out, and I'm going to encourage you to pick from these ones. We have our shortest line of the poem on line 7. 1 word, and that word is bear. What point is truly emphasized when we see only 1 word? Bear. It's bear. The line itself is bear, is emphasized even more. And then we have 3 lines that are the longest lines of the poem. We have line 2, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. We have the line before bear, and places with no carpet on the floor. And then we have the last line, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair, the same thing. So by having those ones longer than the rest of the poem and having them stand out, what does that do for the poem? So I want you to think about those. I want you to pause the video, and I want you to write an ACE answer for that next question. All right, on the back side of that worksheet, we have another question about imagery. So if you remember earlier this year, in your interactive notebook, you filled out some information on imagery. These are the words and phrases that are going to appeal to our 5 senses. Okay, we had the picture of the flower. Okay, and then we read through an example from Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, where we looked, oh, that appeals to the sense of sight. I can picture it, I can see it. That appeals to my sense of taste, I can taste that, etc. Okay, so what I want you to do is from the poem, pick out 1 image that you like and write a paragraph explaining what you think it is, what it looks like, or what it might act like. And remember that a paragraph is set up like an ACE answer, except that it's also going to have a conclusion sentence. So I want you to give me a topic sentence that introduces the image. You need to include some text details, so quotes, a couple words or lines that you're going to be then explaining within your paragraph, and then you're going to wrap it up with a conclusion sentence at the end. Take a few minutes to go through the imagery, look back to the poem, use the words from it to help you describe it. When you're ready, come back for my last explanation on the last question. The last question is on theme. So that one says, what message is the poet trying to send or help the reader understand? We never did do our interactive notebook for theme this year, but we did do one last year. And we were looking at the message that we can learn from that. It's a message about life. So you're looking at this poem, and a lot of times the message that the speaker is giving to us, she's giving advice to her son, and that same advice can go to us. What is the advice of the speaker? And how does she want us to understand that? So make sure that you identify a theme. But I think the theme of this poem is, and it should kind of sound like a moral, okay? It's the message, not summarizing the poem, and then explain it a little bit. So a couple of sentences here. It's not necessarily set up like an ACE answer, but you should be able to support your theme. So there can be multiple possibilities. There isn't one right answer, but you have to be able to support it from the text. All right, and then you're done with this poem.